Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have an astonishing collection of cryptid stories that I really hope you enjoy, with a focus on Dogman. I would also like to wish a belated happy birthday to Annie B. Thank you for your patience. I hope you had a wonderful day, and I hope you enjoy this topic. If you'd like your birthday shout out, feel free to check out Patreon, link in the description. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I was a kid, my family lived up near the US-Canada border deep in the woods. Life out there was all about the outdoors, hunting, fishing, chopping wood. My brothers and I were raised in it. We knew all the trails, the rivers, and how to handle ourselves in the forest. Nothing ever really scared us, until one day it did. I must have been around 9 or 10, and my oldest brother was 16 at the time. My dad took us all out fishing to a spot we all knew well. It was one of those perfect summer days, cool and quiet and shaded by the trees. But there was one point where my brother and I stayed behind, when the rest of us moved down the riverbank. He wasn't gone for long, maybe 15 minutes. But when we came back, he was just standing there like a statue. His fishing rod was on the ground, and he looked pale, almost grey. He didn't say a word the whole walk home. My dad kept asking what happened, but it was like he couldn't even hear us. When we finally got back to the house and sat him down, he started shaking and muttering under his breath. Eventually, in pieces, he told us what he'd seen. He said he watched something huge and dark crouched by the tree line. At first he thought it was a bear, but then it stood up, and it wasn't a bear at all. It was shaped like a man but covered in fur with a long muzzle and pointed ears like a massive dog. In its hands, claws really, was holding something. My brother thought it was either a dog or something like us. Whatever it was, this thing was tearing into it, eating. Then it noticed him. He said it stopped and locked eyes with him. He told me years later, that was the moment that broke him, that stare. He said it looked through him like it knew him. From that day on, he wasn't the same. He'd stay up at night just staring out the windows, convinced it would come back. Sometimes we'd find him pacing or sitting with all the lights on. My dad and uncles found huge tracks around the property more than once, but no one ever caught sight of it again. Still, after that, the rules changed. No younger kids went out alone, not even with the dogs. We always stuck together. My brother struggled a lot after that. Panic attacks, grade slipping, trouble sleeping. He went through therapy and eventually managed to graduate high school and went off to college. But I don't think it ever truly left him. When I was older, in my mid-20s, I asked him directly if he really believed in what he saw. He went quiet for a long time, and I thought he wasn't even going to answer at first, but finally, he said it was the most horrifying thing he'd ever witnessed, and that he'll still see it in his nightmares from time to time. He never wanted to talk about it again, but I could tell in his face, he hadn't made it up. He'd lived with it for all those years, and whatever that thing was, it stole something from him that he never got back. When I was a kid, my bedroom was at the very back of the house, and the windows looked straight out over our backyard. Right beyond the grass began the woods, dense, shadowy, and at night, they appeared endless. My bed sat right next to the window, so whenever I sat up, I'd only have to turn my head slightly to the left to stare out into the dark. I had blinds on the window, but I almost always left them open. I liked the moonlight coming in, and I liked feeling the night air, even through the glass. My dad hated it. He'd scold me, telling me to keep the blinds closed so no one could look in. I'd laugh to myself. Who'd want to be looking in from our backyard? There was nothing but trees out there. At least that's what I thought. One night changed that forever. I woke up out of a deep, dreamless sleep with a strange, almost suffocating sensation. It wasn't like waking up for a glass of water, or because I needed to use the bathroom. It was a heavy, pressing feeling, like someone's eyes were on me. My blinds were 3/4 of the ways down, just enough space left to open for a slice of moonlight to pour through. It was one of those bright nights where the moon seems too big and too close, washing everything in a pale blue glow. I sat up slowly, my heart already pounding. I'd never been a kid who woke up scared. I didn't get night terrors and I didn't sleepwalk, but this time I was wide awake, trembling. Something deep inside me was telling me, almost commanding me to look outside, which is what I did. I reached gingerly for the blinds and with a shaky hand lifted them a little higher. And there it was. At first, my backyard looked empty, just moonlight stretching across the grass. But at the edge of the yard, just where the trees began, stood something so wrong that even as a child, before I knew anything about cryptids or myths, I knew it wasn't a normal animal. It was massive, far bigger than any dog or coyote I'd ever seen. Its fur was the darkest I'd ever witnessed, like it absorbed light rather than reflected. It didn't look like fur so much as moving shadow. The thing stood on 4 legs, but its proportions were off. Its small pointed ears stood erect like a dog's, but sharper, almost like triangles cut into the night. And the face, it suggested something human, but it wasn't human at all. A long snout, a jaw that seemed to stretch too wide, eyes that glinted faintly in the moonlight, but weren't reflecting like a normal animal's would. It wasn't moving. It was just standing there at the edge of the yard, perfectly still, like it had been waiting. It wasn't looking at the woods, and it wasn't looking directly at me either. But I felt it knew I was there. My heart slammed so hard against my ribs I thought I'd faint. I immediately dropped back down into bed, pulling the blanket up to my chin. My head was close to my feet now, further from the window. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself it was a trick of the light, some animal that had wandered out of the woods. But deep down I knew it wasn't. I couldn't leave the blinds as they were. I had to close them properly, with trembling hands. So I sat up, telling myself I'd just pull them down without looking, but of course I looked. It had moved. Now it was closer to my window, crouched or sitting. I couldn't quite tell. But in that same unnatural posture. Only this time its head was turned directly towards me. Its eyes locked with mine. They glinted cold and predatory in the moonlight. I yanked the blinds down so hard it rattled against the frame. Then I threw myself back under the covers, curling into a ball and shaking. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, heart hammering. The sound of my blood roaring in my ears until finally, exhaustion and adrenaline pulled me back into a shallow, restless sleep. The strangest part is what happened after. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Some part of me almost wanted to see it again. Every time I woke up in the middle of the night after that, I'd sneak a look through the blinds, hoping or dreading that it would be there at the edge of the yard again, but it never was. I asked my sisters if they'd ever seen anything weird outside at night. They all shook their heads. They refused to look out the window after dark. "We don't want to know what's out there," they told me. Years passed. The woods are gone now. They built a train line right through what used to be my backyard. And whatever that thing was, it either moved on or found someone else to haunt. But I'll never forget what I saw. And looking back now, with everything I've learned, with all the stories I've read so far, I'm sure it wasn't a coyote, nor a stray dog, nor some freaky bear with mange. It was a Dogman. I know it was. I live in the suburbs outside of Chicago. My city is densely populated and highly suburbanized. but there are still patches where the urban sprawl gives way to something more rural. Quiet stretches of road where the trees crowd close. These events took place on one of those stretches, near a major road, but in a section of town that feels almost forgotten. 2 nights ago at around 9 p.m, I was driving home with my girlfriend. We were talking about a TV show we were watching, and we were laughing. Near my house, though, there's a peculiar road I've always hated driving down at night. It's unnervingly dark with no streetlights and no comforting glow from nearby houses. Just darkness broken by the occasional headlight. The dense trees on either side seem to drinking any light from the surrounding area. A few scattered houses dot the roadside, but most of them are run down or completely abandoned, their windows like hollow eyes staring out at the road. Every time I pass, I feel like there could be something watching me from beyond the tree line. I always flick on the high beams while I'm there, trying to carve through the darkness. We were about halfway down when something darted from the edge of the road into a hedge. At first, I thought it was just a deer or a stray dog, but as my headlights caught it, my stomach dropped. What I saw wasn't exactly clear, but what I did see had burnt itself into my memory. My headlights only illuminated the lower half of the thing. It was far enough down the road and tall enough that I couldn't get a good full look, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. The creature was gangly, grotesque. It had to be at least 6 or 7 feet tall, with a body so thin I could see under its ribs. It was covered in fur, short and bristly, almost like an otter's that clung to its frame. Its legs were bent backwards at the knees like a bird's, but the feet were pawed like a dog, only far too large, too heavy for its frail-looking frame. Its arms were long and spindly, swinging as it moved, and though I couldn't see its hands, something about the length and shape of the limbs told me I didn't want to. Its back wasn't straight, but it curved at a strange angle, leaning forward as it moved like a man trying to sneak, but unable to stand up straight. The way it ran was wrong, not animal, not human, but like something in between. It tiptoed exaggeratedly, each step deliberate and jerky, like a cartoon thief creeping across a stage in a black and white reel. But there was nothing funny about the way it moved. It was like a nightmare caricature of life, less a creature and more a collection of parts from others, stitched together by something that didn't understand how they were supposed to fit together. I froze. My conversation with my girlfriend died in my throat, and I just kept driving, staring straight ahead. My pulse thundered in my ears. In the rearview mirror there was only darkness. My girlfriend noticed how shaken I was, but she hadn't seen it. She kept asking me what was wrong, and I couldn't bring myself to tell her right then. Later, when I finally did, she looked at me differently, at first skeptical, then unnerved, as I described the thing in more detail. That night I barely slept. The next day I told a friend of mine who lives nearby what happened. His face went pale. He reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. Back in August, just 1 street over from where I'd seen the creature, there'd been a bloodied, skinned animal laying by the road. It stayed there for days, mangled beyond recognition. We drove by it a few times trying to figure out what it had been, a raccoon, maybe a dog, but it was hard to tell. The memory makes me feel sick thinking about it, but I can't help but wonder if whatever I saw had something to do with that. I don't know what the thing was, I don't know if it's still out there, but I just know what I saw. Does anyone have any idea what it could have been? I'm at a loss. In 2004, my family bought an old house on the outskirts of Monclova, Coahuila. It was a big property built in the 70s, and it had been sitting empty for years. The place needed a ton of work, so we hired workers to start fixing the roof and some of the walls. They'd usually stay during the week, and I'd stop by on Fridays to check in and pay them. One Friday afternoon, I pulled up and found the entire crew standing outside by the gate. They looked rattled, nervous, and a few of them refused to even look me in the eye. I joked that they were about to go on strike, but the manager of the group shook his head and told me something. "This isn't a strike, boss. There's something in there, very large, like a dog standing on two legs. It growled at us and told us to leave." I thought they were messing with me, but the look on his face told me otherwise. None of them would go back in, so I grabbed a flashlight and went in alone. The house was empty and quiet. Dust was everywhere, shadows stretching across the old rooms. I checked everything, even the back patio where they swore it had been, but I couldn't see anything. But I'll admit, the air felt heavy, like I wasn't alone. When I came back out, I told them it was clear, but 2 workers quit on the spot and never returned. I figured it was just nerves or superstition until it happened again. 2 years later, I hired a young guy to replaster one of the walls in the same patio. I came by one afternoon and found him outside the house trembling. He wouldn't even step back inside. He swore he'd seen something massive and black in the patio, a dog-like figure but standing upright. He said its eyes glowed, and it let out this guttural growl that didn't sound like an animal he'd ever heard. He quit that same day. We lived in that house for 18 years. My family never saw anything directly, but workers and visitors did, always in the same spot, always described it in the same way. Tall, black fur, upright like a man, face too much like a dog to be human, but too human to be a dog. People in the US would call it Dogman. Here, they call it a Nawal, a man that could shift into a beast. For years I shrugged it off as stories until one night it wasn't. It was maybe late, 2 a.m. and I couldn't sleep, so I got up to go for a glass of water. The kitchen window looked out into the back patio. Normally I avoided looking out at night, but this time I did and froze. Something was standing there. It was taller than the patio door frame, broad-shouldered, covered in dark fur. Its ears were pointed, its snout long, its eyes reflecting a dull amber in the dark. It wasn't moving. It was just watching. I couldn't breathe. For a moment I thought I was dreaming, but then it tilted its head slightly, like it knew I was there. That small, slow movement was enough to snap me out of it. I stumbled back, hit the wall, and by the time I found the courage to peek again, it was gone. I never told my family what I saw, but from that night on I understood what those workers meant. The patio was never empty. Something was always there. And I'll never forget the way it looked at me. Not like I was prey, not yet, but that I could be. It was the first week of September 2010, and like thousands of other kids, I was heading back for yet another year of school. Yay, I thought bitterly. School had stopped being enjoyable a long time ago. Someone twice my size had decided I was his personal punching bag, and the school did nothing about it. He was a star athlete after all, and every day felt like another round in a fight I'd never signed up for. One afternoon, my parents sent me to a nearby shop to pick up sandwich supplies for the week until they could do their big grocery run. I didn't mind. The shop was less than 15 minutes away, and I'd usually treat myself to a soda for the walk back. As I stepped inside, the late summer air still clinging to the heat of day, though the sky was dimming into that soft, beautiful orange that comes right before the night swallows everything. I expected to hear the usual sounds of kids laughing in the yard, the barking of a dog down the block, bikes clattering along the pavement, but instead it was silent. The streets, normally alive with children, dogs, and the background hum of life, were eerily still. No voices, no barking. Even the cicadas that had been relentless for weeks were gone. I shrugged it off, figuring everyone was still adjusting to the new school year and maybe calling it an early night. Still, the silence clung to me as I walked, making every footstep sound louder than it should have. Inside the shop, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and I grabbed the bread, meat, and cheese, and slipped a soda under my arm. The woman at the counter tried to chat, her voice warm and familiar, but my nerves were already frayed from the first days of school. I faked a smile, mumbled something about needing to get home quickly, and hurried out. The way back gave me options. I could take the main road straight up 2 alternate routes that rejoined in about 5 minutes. Those 2 roads bordered a large overgrown field, once a wild mess of weeds and trees, a perfect hiding spot for stray animals, rodents, birds, and kids needing smokes. I always took the straight road when I was alone because it was better lit. That evening, though, the field was swallowed in darkness. Only 2 dim, often flickering streetlights marked its edges, their weak light barely cutting into the black thicket. The road itself was riddled with potholes big enough to wreck a car's axle. I stuck to the street instead of the shoulder to avoid the deeper holes, and that night smelled faintly of damp earth and hot asphalt cooling in the air. That's when I heard it. Movement in the field, dry stalks snapping, grass parting. My head jerked towards the sound, but what I saw froze me where I stood. A massive head pushed out from the brush, larger than a grizzly's, thick fur, black as the depths of the sea, bristled around pointed ears. Its snout was long, lined with enormous teeth that gleamed faintly in the weak light, each one set against pitch-black gums. Its eyes caught the steady streetlight in a dull, unnatural reflection, and for the briefest second I thought it looked amused. The thing didn't move like an animal caught off guard. It moved like it had been following me. I don't remember running. I remember blinking, and then I was suddenly at my front door, slammed it shut and locking behind me. My lungs burnt, and my hands were shaking so hard I could barely turn the deadbolt. I told my parents I'd seen a giant black dog that had chased me. They were surprised. Everyone who knew me knew I wasn't afraid of animals, especially canines. My mum tried to soothe me, saying it was probably an abused stray, drawn to the meat I was carrying, and I wanted to believe her, and I clung to that explanation because the alternative felt impossible. Months passed. By January 2021, winter break had come, and one night I decided to go for a late-night walk around 9. Normally I wasn't allowed out that late, but since it was Christmas break, my parents relented, as long as I kept an eye out for drunk drivers and the usual dangers. By then I'd shoved the fall encounter so far into the back of my mind, it may as well have been a bad dream. I walked those streets at all hours without thinking twice. That night the cold was sharp. My iPod had literally frozen and wouldn't turn back on, and I shoved it deeper into my coat pocket, hoping my body heat could coax it back to life. The sound of my boots crunching on ice and slush echoed in the stillness. The road was coated in a mix of ice, wet snow, and packed slush that glittered faintly under what few house lights burned in the distance. The streetlights along that stretch were dead as usual. It was so quiet I could hear the faint roar of cars on the main road far off, but nothing close to me. That's when I noticed how dead the night was. Holiday season or not, my town was never this quiet. This area was usually buzzing with life at any hour. But now it felt like the whole area had been emptied. And then I saw him. Under one of the dim, barely working streetlights stood a figure. At first glance, it looked like a tall man. Maybe he was bundled up for the cold. But the black silhouette made something in my gut twist. I slowed, staring. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe a straggler from a party. Either way, something about him was wrong. I decided to turn around, to backtrack until I reached the nearest working streetlight and then hurry home. But just then my iPod roared to life, blasting music at full volume. The loudest, most obnoxious song on the playlist. The sound ripped through the silence and into my ears. I cursed, fumbling to turn it down, and when I looked back, the man turned his head slightly. What I saw was no man at all. His head stretched forward, forming a long snout. And then, as if to confirm what I already feared, one massive pointed ear could be seen as his head moved upright out of the shadow. It didn't grush me, it didn't growl, but it stood there watching. I yelped and bolted, my boots hammering against the ice-slicked road, and by some miracle I didn't slip. My heart pounded so hard I could taste blood in my mouth, and when I reached the door I threw myself inside, without looking back. I told my parents there had been a weird man in black near the store. But deep down, I knew I'd seen the Dogman again. By spring of 2014 I had almost managed to forget it. I was an adult now, with no curfew, and I'd started walking the neighborhood again like nothing had ever happened. The town had cleared the overgrown field by then, flattened it, sold it, or leased it, I'm not sure. It was gone, replaced by something neat and open, and I'd convinced myself that the past was behind me. I still loved animals though, and on my walks I'd often stop to pet the strays or wandering cats. One night I was kneeling in the street, surrounded by them, scratching as many as I could reach. Then, without warning, one particularly tough battle-scarred tomcat, one that never flinched from anything, yowled, fur bristling as if on fire. The others scattered instantly, leaving me crouched alone in the middle of the road. My heart leapt. I stood scanning the street. Maybe someone had blasted one of those high-frequency noises only cats can hear. And that's when I saw it. Sitting in the shadow, shaggy black and grey. Its outline reminded me of a wolfhound mixed with a malamute, but I didn't recognize this dog. I told myself it was a rescue or maybe a visitor's pet. Then it began moving, like in pain, each limb dragging unnaturally. As it stepped into the porch light, the illusion shattered and my stomach dropped. It had hands, not paws, and it was crawling towards me like a person. Its limbs jerked with a grotesque rhythm, as though it wasn't meant to crawl but was forcing itself to. Its fingers splayed into the dirt, pulling forwards, its eyes locking onto mine, unblinking. I didn't think. I ran. My grandmother could have been calling from behind me and I wouldn't have slowed. My only regret was not warning the family friends whose houses I passed. I'd never seen it again after that, and pray I never do. These days I rarely go out at night, and when I do I avoid the streets entirely. But my memory never really leaves. I've since cleansed my home, hope to ward off bad energies. I like to think it helps, but I can't shake the confusion. How did something like that appear in a populated area? Am I the only one who's seen it? At least I know I'm not entirely alone. Others out there have seen things like this too, right? I'm an outdoorsman. I've spent my entire life hunting, camping, hiking, and learning survival skills. I'm comfortable in the woods, and I know wildlife well. I know what bears look like, how wolves behave, and how they move. But what I saw some summer day in 2007, what charged at my cousin and I, was no animal I've ever known. And the only thing I can compare it to is something that people will call the Dogman. I was 17 at the time, cocky, but still knowledgeable enough about the outdoors to know when something's wrong. My family owned a cabin in northwestern Wisconsin, and I practically grew up there during the summers. By day, the woods felt normal, almost welcoming, but at night, everyone knew better than to wander far. Bears, wolves, and cougars called those woods home. The strangest part about staying there was the bonfire pit by the beach. At night, you could clearly see the tree line from the fire pit, row after row of dark trees just beyond the glow of the flames. It always felt like something was just out there, watching. This happened around midday, between noon and 2 o'clock, when the woods would have been alive with birdsong and insects. My cousins and I were having an airsoft battle for fun. I was in full woodland camo. He wasn't. I'd retreated into the ATV trail to get a tactical advantage, and our battle had taken us about 200 meters into the woods. Eventually we called it quits and stopped at the edge of a small clearing just talking. He stood about 10 feet away from me. Feeling playful, I decided to mess with him. I shushed and whispered, "We're being watched," and he froze. But the moment the words left my mouth, I realized the woods had gone dead quiet. I started scanning the tree line, my eyes swiping left to right, and that's when I saw it. At first, I caught the glint of teeth, long, sharp teeth. It was panting, its mouth slightly open, staring directly at my cousin. My brain fought to make sense of what I was seeing. It looked like a wolf, but not a normal wolf. This thing was enormous, at least the size of a black bear, easily 300 pounds. It was crouched next to a tree, one arm wrapped around the trunk, not a paw, an arm, with clawed hands gripping the bark. Its fur was a reddish brown and it was standing on 2 legs. I told my cousin, "We have to go," but before I even finished, he was already sprinting back towards the cabin. The creature, whatever it was, had locked eyes on us. It took a few heavy steps forwards on 2 legs, and then dropped to all 4s. And when it ran, it came after us, barreling through the brush. I could hear it snapping branches and pounding the earth, breathing heavy right behind us. It felt like it was on our heels. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. We broke through the tree line into the open, sprinting for the cabin. But when I looked back, it was gone. The woods was still again, like nothing had happened. What stuck with me the most wasn't just the chase, it was the size. When it stood upright, it had to have been at least nearly 7 feet tall. Where the front paws would have been, it had large clawed hands. Wolves don't run like that. They don't sprint comfortably on 2 legs, and no wolf I've ever heard growls like that. Even black bears, when upright, waddle awkwardly. I've tried to rationalize it. I've heard people say wolves sometimes stand or take a few steps on 2 legs. I know what a bear looks like at a distance, but nothing about this creature's movement or appearance fit. The closest description, ridiculous as it sounds, would be werewolf or dogman. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but that's what I saw, and 17 years later, I can still remember it like it happened yesterday. It was July of 2015 in Wise River, Montana. Living alone out there in the humidity had its perks, but also its drawbacks. In a remote spot like mine, there's no cable. The only way to get TV was through satellite. It had been a normal night of flipping channels until the signal began acting up, cutting in and out, which it did when the weather got weird sometimes. I sighed, grabbed my flashlight and a gun. Out here, that was just standard procedure. There had been sightings before, but nothing I could ever confirm. Nothing I could honestly ever call credible, but enough to make me uneasy. Enough that, aside from my regular sidearm, I'd also purchased an AR. I'd chalked up those sightings to imagination, shadows, maybe a wolf passing through. But tonight as I opened the door, something felt different. The silence hit me like a wave. It wasn't just quiet, it was eerie. And out here in the middle of the night, there's always noises, crickets, frogs, the distant rush of the Wise River, for example. But at 11:30 that night, it was like the noise was on pause. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. But I tried to brush it off. The satellite dish sat in the far corner of the property near the tree line. The grass was slick with dew under my boots, and the beam of my flashlight cut a pale cone through the darkness. Every footstep sounded too loud. My own breathing was echoing in my ears, and I crouched by the dish, starting to work, checking the wires, nudging the angle a few degrees. I'd done this loads of times before. And that's when I heard a small, sharp snap of a stick off to my left. I froze. That wasn't the sound of a squirrel or a rabbit. I turned slowly, raising the flashlight. The beam slid across the underbrush and caught movement. Standing at the edge of the trees was a creature. I got a good look at it. I stood there, staring for what felt like an eternity, but must have been no more than 10 seconds. The head came into focus first, cropped ears that pointed straight up, a snout narrower and longer than a bear's. The sort you'd expect to see on a massive wolf or a dog. But those teeth, they jutted from its jaws like knives. Its eyes burned a deep red color and didn't reflect light like an animal's. My flashlight trembled in my hand, but I couldn't look away. Its body was enormous, built like some grotesque cross between a man and a beast. The shoulders were impossibly broad, the arms so long they seemed to hang past its knees, far longer than its legs, even crouched the way it was with one clawed hand wrapped around a small tree trunk like it was nothing. And for context, I'm 6 foot tall, and it stood about eye level with me. If it had straightened up, it would have easily reached 7.5, maybe 8 feet. The fur was black and coarse, thicker around the neck and chest like a mane, thinning out along its lower body. It looked powerful, every muscle shifting under the pelt as it shifted its weight, never breaking its stare. It looked like a dog, but it wasn't a dog. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. The worst part wasn't how it looked. The worst part was how quiet it had been. Something that size shouldn't have been crashing through the undergrowth, snapping branches, making noise. But it had gotten within 15 yards of me. 15 yards without me hearing a thing. A wave of dread washed over me, so strong it made my vision blur. My instincts screamed at me to get inside now. I had no idea if it was observing me, stalking me, or preparing to attack. I didn't want to find out. I started backing away, one slow step at a time, gum at my side, flashlight locked on its eyes. My heart hammered so loud I wasn't sure it could hear it. Then, without another thought, I turned and bolted. My boots tore through wet grass, slipping once again but catching myself before I fell. I sprinted to the house, slammed the door, locked it, then locked every window, every door, every bolt. Only then did I let myself breathe. Inside the safety of the walls, I replayed what I'd seen over and over in my mind. The cropped ears, the red eyes, the claws wrapped around the trees, the silent predatory stillness. I don't know if it was aggressive or not. I don't know what it wanted. All I know is that it was there and it saw me. I didn't live on that property much long after that, but even after I left, there were nights when the woods around the area would come alive with sounds I couldn't explain. I wonder if it was the same creature or just local wildlife. For anyone curious, the encounter happened near 61720 Mountain Highway 43, Wise River, Montana, 59762. Look it up on Google Maps if you want. It's real. It's there. And so was this. It was March 2015, in Southern California. I was living near Camp Pendleton at the time. Our neighborhood sat on a little island of houses in a sea of wilderness. Beyond the last cul-de-sac there was nothing, just miles of open land. I've always been interested in the supernatural, ever since I was a kid. I devoured ghost stories, Mortis sightings, and anything unexplained, but deep down I never really believed. Not until this happened anyway. Before I went to bed, I opened my window because it was hot. I left my curtains pulled back and my shades all the way up to let the air flow in. The window was right next to my bed, and from there I could see the street and the crosswalk across from my house. I didn't think much of it when I fell asleep. But around 3 a.m. I woke up for no reason. Normally if I woke at that hour it was because I was thirsty or needed the bathroom, but I needed neither. My eyes snapped open and the house was silent, and I automatically glanced out the window. And that's when I noticed something standing at the crosswalk across the street. At first my groggy brain tried to make sense of it. That's weird, I thought. We didn't have early morning runners until about 4:45. Sometimes shift workers or Marines would pass through, but never at 3. I pushed myself up and went closer to the window to get a better look. And what I saw next is burnt into my memory forever. It wasn't standing like a person. Its legs were bent oddly like an animal's. Its body was covered in white fur, but patchy enough that I could still see skin showing in places. Its back was hunched, shoulder high, neck thrust forward slightly, and its face looked like a dog's or maybe a wolf's or a coyote, but just wrong. If it had been standing up straight, I would have guessed it to be 7 or 8 feet tall. As it was hunched, it looked massive. My mind scrambled to rationalize. It's 3 a.m., I told myself. You're hallucinating. Go back to sleep. But I couldn't. I was frozen, standing there with my palms on the windowsill, unable to look away. Every detail sharp. The snout, the ears, like a coyote's or wolf's, but longer and sharper. Coyotes were common where we lived, but they never came into the neighborhood and never stood upright. I was trying to summon the will to close the window when it turned its head and looked right at me. It was directly under the streetlight. Its features were clear, every line of fur, every glint of skin, and its eyes were the darkest thing I'd ever seen. That got me out of my trance. I slammed the window shut, yanked the blinds down, ripped the curtain closed, and dove into bed, pulling the covers over my face like a scared child. My heart was hammering. I lay there staring into the darkness, waiting for the sound of claws at my windows. But they never came, and I never fell asleep. 2 years passed, and in June of 2017 I was living in the same house. That night I woke again, but this time, just because I was hungry. It was maybe 1 a.m. I walked downstairs quietly, not wanting to wake anyone, and made myself a snack. I sat at the kitchen table with my back to the window on the side of the house. The window was low, barely a foot off the ground, and it had been left open about 10 inches, as my mum had forgot to shut it. There was no screen because it had been torn months ago, and we had yet to replace it. I was wearing earbuds, watching something on my phone, when I heard a noise. It was subtle at first, a sound I couldn't quite place. I paused the video and pulled out one of the earbuds, and the house went silent. And then I heard it again. Breathing. Heavy, ragged and rough. Not like a human's. It was right behind me, just outside the window, maybe inches away. My stomach dropped. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up. Goosebumps covered my arms. I couldn't bring myself to turn around. I just sat there frozen, listening. The breathing went on for what felt like forever, at least 2 minutes. Then came the footsteps, heavy, crunching, as whatever it was moved away from the house and the sound faded into the night. I sat there for 10 minutes, maybe more, before I dared to move. Then I shut the window, locked it, and closed the curtain and bolted upstairs to my room, like a child running from a nightmare. I told my parents about the first encounter back when it happened. I was 16 then, still living under their roof. They'd laugh, said I was seeing things and that it was probably a coyote. After the second encounter, I told them again. This time they said I was tired and hearing things. And maybe they're right, maybe it was a coyote, maybe I had hallucinated. But you know what? Deep down, I don't believe it. Not after seeing what I saw under the streetlight at 3 a.m., and not after hearing that breathing right outside my window 2 years later. I've carried this with me ever since. It's been gnawing at me. I finally downloaded this app just to get the story out there, because I need answers. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? Was it a coyote? Was it something else entirely? All I know is I'll never forget the eyes at the crosswalk, and the sound of breathing behind me in the dark. This happened almost 20 years ago. I was driving down 65 in 2008, from Atlanta to Pensacola. After a long flight, I got to Atlanta around 10. I had a friend who said I could stay with them for the night, but I wasn't feeling well, so I decided to drive back. It was around 3 a.m. and I was in between Montgomery and Pensacola, near Flomaton, but just north of there. I was on 65 driving south, when I saw what I thought was a bear. It was over a deer carcass. It was pulling its leg off, and that's when I realized it certainly wasn't a bear. It stood up and looked at me. Bears can't do what it was doing. He was twisting the leg off with his hands. The eyes, that's what really made me understand. He looked me in the eyes. The face was more wolf-like. He turned his upper body at the waist, which bears don't do. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't a bear. And I knew I saw it. I had slowed down to about 20 miles an hour. I was on the freeway, but at that time of night, there's never anyone on the road in the area. He was ripping the leg off the deer, and when he saw me, he stopped. He took a few steps and jumped a fence into a pasture. It's probably the most frightening thing I've ever seen. My great-grandmother owned 28 acres in rural Kentucky. She left 14 acres to my Aunt Rita and 14 acres to my Gram. My Gram left her land and her house to my husband and I. My experience actually happened before my husband and I ever met. About 8 years ago, I was out in the woods behind our house with my ex-boyfriend and my friend. We were exploring and really just hanging out. Sometime during our escapade, I split from them and went my own way. I know my land pretty well as I grew up here, so I headed for a clearing I thought would be kind of nice to relaxing. The clearing in question is pretty close to the edge of the woods, and you can even make out the back of my barn if you look hard enough. When I cleared the trees, I immediately felt like I was being watched. It was so sudden and intense I actually stopped in my tracks. Some part of my mind was in control, but it didn't feel like me, if that makes sense. The part that was in control told me to turn around, so I'd face the way I just came, slowly, and not make a sound. When I turned, I didn't see anything right away, just the forest I came out from, and what looked like a downed tree off to the left. But my head told me to move slowly out of the woods. In order to do that, I have to pass the downed tree, as the path out of the woods runs that way. For some reason, I really didn't want to do this. My body started moving for me, and I made my way down the path towards the tree, keeping my eye on it. But the closer I got to it, the less tree-like it looked. Finally, I was in front of it about 10 feet away. It was not a tree. It was an impossible large wolf-like creature looking right at me. It was lying down with its head on its paws, and it was truly enormous. I wanted to scream and run, but my mind wouldn't let me. It told me to be as quiet and as slow as possible. I stared that thing down for what felt like 30 minutes, but was probably no more than 30 seconds. Even still, I got a great look at it. It was dark brown, as big as a black bear, and really still, and its eyes followed me as I moved. But that was all that moved. I know it wasn't a bear. I can tell the difference between a canine and a bear. I cleared the woods and immediately ran for my house, screaming for my friend and my ex. Oddly enough, though, I didn't tell them about what I'd seen, and didn't ever want to. Not because it sounds crazy, but just because I didn't think I should. 5 years later, I was hanging out with my cousin, and I had the sudden urge to share this with her. She grew up around these woods too, so she knows which clearing I'm referring to. I thought she wouldn't believe me, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood straight up while I was explaining the thing, and I knew at that point she'd seen it too. She told me that when she was young, she was playing down by the barn with her siblings, my other cousins, and my Aunt Rita called them for dinner. My other cousins went up to my aunt's house, but my cousin stayed to play. She was throwing rocks at the trees when she saw the same wolf creature come running out of the woods at her. She said it was fast enough to get from the tree line to the barn about 200 feet by the time she got to the orchard, which is 20 feet from the barn. She ran to my aunt's house and never breathed a word of what she saw. The older she got, the more convinced she became that it had just been a dream. I haven't been back to the clearing since that day, and my cousin's story explains why I never saw her go into the woods when I was young. My sister hates it here. She claims she feels watched, Everyone but me thinks she's ridiculous. My cousin theorized that it's a type of guardian spirit. It was angry with her for throwing rocks at the trees, and that's why it was aggressive to her. It didn't attack or chase me because I wasn't harming anything. I'm not sure, but it's the best explanation we have, as no one but us knows about it. The weirdest thing of all is that my cousin swears she remembers it having large purple-colored eyes that burned into her. I don't remember what its eyes looked like though. I stared into the eyes for about 30 seconds, but still can't remember what they looked like, only that they followed my movements. I live in a rural area just outside of a small town in northern Michigan. It's mostly pine forest and old logging roads out here, and at night it's pitch black. I've always been used to the sound of coyotes and deer moving through my yard, but what I saw last night was nothing like anything I've ever encountered. Around 1:30 a.m., my dog started going nuts at the back door. He's normally calm, even with coyotes howling, but he was whining and pacing like he wanted to get away from something instead of chasing it. I stepped outside with a flashlight, thinking maybe there was a raccoon or something messing with the trash cans. The first thing I noticed was how quiet everything had gotten. The crickets, the frogs, even the breeze was just dead silence. My flashlight beam caught movement at the edge of the tree line about 40 feet away. At first I thought it was a person, but it was hunched low, moving on all fours, but in this weird, deliberate way. Its back was way too long. Its legs too bent like a man crawling, but with animal limbs. Then it stood up. I swear on everything this thing was at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. It had this thick, dark fur all over its body, but the head looked like a German shepherd, only bigger. The ears were pointed, the snout long, its eyes reflected red in my flashlight, and the smell? It hit me at the same time. A wet dog mixed with something rotting. It stood there staring at me, not moving nor making a sound. My dog bolted back inside, and I swear I felt this pressure, like the air was heavier. After maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like forever, it dropped back down to all fours and disappeared into the trees without a sound. I stayed up all night, with every light in the house on. I kept thinking maybe it was just a big dog or a bear, but bears don't walk like that. They don't have heads shaped like that either. I thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't. 2 nights later at around 3 a.m., I woke up to my dog growling low at the window. When I peeked through the blinds, I saw it again. This time it wasn't at the tree line. It was circling my house, slow, deliberate steps, shoulders rolling like a wolf. It would stop at a window and just stand there listening like it knew we were inside. Every time I moved from one window to another, its head would snap up and look right at me, even though I hadn't made a sound. My dog was trembling so hard his nails kicked on the floor. It made one slow lap around the house and then disappeared back into the trees like before. I haven't slept since. I'm not even sure this thing is an animal. Has anyone seen anything like this? I wanted to share this story that happened about a month ago to my wife. Me and my wife work in television, and it requires a lot of traveling and a lot of late-night car rides. We live in Florida, and my wife had to go to Georgia for work. Because we take so many plane rides, we sometimes decide when it's only 4 to 7 hours that we'll drive instead. Believe me, after over 20 years of getting on planes, being able to drive every once in a while is a blessing. So it's around 11:30 p.m. when her brother texts me to pick up the phone when she calls, which I thought was odd, because why would I not pick up? As soon as I'm reading the text, I get a frantic call from my wife. Now, please understand that my wife doesn't subscribe to any cryptid or paranormal stuff. However, I most certainly do. So for her to be this freaked out and panicked means something crazy went down. She starts talking really fast and I can't understand any of what she's telling me. So eventually I tell her to calm down and tell me what's going on. She starts telling me, "I've seen one of those things you sometimes talk about, the documentary thing." Still kind of puzzled, I ask her, "What thing exactly?" She replies, "The wolf, the human wolf, the Dogman." She's driving down from Georgia, and it's at this point 2 hours removed from our house, and we are located just above Tampa, so she's already driving in Florida. But she's driving down this 45-mile-an-hour road that gives you an idea of the road itself. So not a big, broad road. As she's making a turn, her lights hit what she at that moment thinks is a man standing bent over the side of the road. She figures that's really odd, because who would be standing in the middle of the night in a small, unlit road? Then, as the light is hitting it more and more, she realizes there's something off here as the light is climbing up, as she gets closer, revealing that the arms are completely covered in hair, and it's reaching to pick up something off the ground. She also sees massive hands. Then, when fully illuminated, she sees this thing is hunched over and already standing at 7 feet and starts to move up, and she sees a complete canine head with ears pointed backwards. She tells me that despite going pretty fast, it's like everything is slowing down for her so that her brain can make sense of it. She tells me it has really long, thin arms, very muscular though, short fur with long fur at the back and neck where the thighs meet. By the time she passed it, I almost stood up completely and had not once looked at her direction or acknowledged the car or the lights. By the time she passed it, it almost stood up completely and had not once looked at her direction or acknowledged the car or the light. And it is as if this thing didn't really care. She tells me that she was on the phone with her brother as she sees this thing, and she started screaming when she saw it, causing her brother to also freak out and ask her what was going on, which is when she rambles and tells him that she's got to call me. After she tells me the story, I calm her down, tell her not to exit the vehicle until she gets home, and ask if she has enough gas to make it without stopping, which she does. She carries a firearm on her, but there's no way she was going to stand a chance against this thing if it decided to go for her. We talk a bit, and I can tell she's in shock, and she tells me she's trying to make sense of it all. She wonders if anyone from YouTube Prankster tried to do something like that for views. I live in central Kansas, not too far off a reservation on a farm that was established roughly around 1858. I just moved out here about 2 weeks ago, and there has been something stalking the farm. At first, I thought it was just coyotes or even feral dogs, and took appropriate measures. But tonight, both my boyfriend and I saw something that really doesn't fit any local wildlife. The first time I saw it was around 9 p.m, and it was 25 to 40 feet away with greyish fur, but it covered somewhere around half an acre to an acre in a matter of moments, like bringing a BB gun up to a bear. Mind you, I thought it was a coyote and just wanted to scare it off from my chickens, not try to injure it. It was very, very big. By the time it got to the tree line and looked back at me, it was every bit of 7 to 10 feet tall. About an hour and a half later, my boyfriend and I were back outside, and we both saw it. At that point, it got much closer, just across the road, maybe 75 feet away, and it was every bit of the same 7 to 10 feet tall, with a bipedal gait, snapping full-sized tree branches. And if you've ever heard a tree branch break, you'll know what I'm talking about. And it went from being dog level to the ground to being taller than us from that far away while standing in a creek bed. We've also heard voices outside, but most definitely not human and not cat or animal vocalizing, so there's that too. Any suggestions? I'm just trying to get a handle on what the next steps might be for us at this point. I had a very strange experience several years ago that I've never known how to classify. I was out walking in the evening, and it had gotten dark. It was a small town in Ohio, and I was in a neighborhood with houses everywhere. I saw movement between two houses, no more than 10 to 20 feet away from me, and I figured it was a person, so I looked up. This thing was about 7 feet tall, and shaped like, well, nowadays I'd describe it like the shape of Professor Lupin when he turned into a werewolf, but back then that movie hadn't been released yet, so I had no frame of reference. If I saw any finer details for facial features, etc., I don't remember. I stopped in my tracks and watched this thing cross the yard and disappear into the shallow shadow cast by the eave overhanging of a house. That shadow was maybe 6 to 8 inches deep at best. I was so confused and waited for it to pop out onto the porch or something, thinking the disappearing was some kind of optical illusion and that it would reappear, but it didn't. It had just walked into the side of the house. I've never in my life felt a terror response like that. Does this sound like a possible Dogman sighting? Or something else? Let me preface this by saying I'm not really a skeptic, but I look for the logical reasoning on everything first and foremost. Lately, I've been noticing glimpses of what I can only describe as a large black dog. So far, I've never been able to see the entire thing, and frustratingly, it's always something I think can be explained away logically. But I find it strange, so I'd love to have your thoughts. It started about a month ago, when I was closing alone at work. It's a 2-person job, but someone was sick, so I was exhausted, and I was washing dishes from the very corner of my eye when I caught a glimpse of something black. It was like the top of a dog going from the shoulders down to the tail, but I didn't see the head nor legs. And it walked behind a wall, so I quickly lost sight of it. Less than a second. I double-checked, but of course nothing. The second time it happened once again when I was closing alone, and I was in the exact same spot, around the same area. Mind you, I was even more exhausted this time and sleep-deprived, but this time I caught a glimpse of the entire top side, as I saw a downward-facing ear, except this time I saw it walk by a stool and heard the stool move, but didn't see it move. This one is even more frustrating, because I checked, and the stool was out of place. But I could have just forgotten to put it back in its place after a customer sat on it, and as I said, I only heard it move, I didn't see it. Normally, with just 2 instances, I wouldn't care less, but last night I awoke in the middle of the night to a singular loud bark. Once again, this can be explained as me being in the middle of a dream, nothing really supernatural. To me, this all sounds like exhaustion, especially as I've been very, very stressed lately in life. However, the only particular thing to me is that it's always a dog. To the believers, is there anything related to dogs in the supernatural? I tried looking up dog hauntings and stuff, but I found this about the Dogman. I don't know. I'd appreciate your insights on it. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening and joining me in tonight's video on the Dogman and other cryptids. If you did enjoy the content, it would be really great if you let me know. I do try and get to all the comments, even if sometimes I am a little late. And if you would like even more stories, don't forget to sub. We also have a podcast called Mort's Bedtime Stories, where I publish every week. And I'd finally like to give a huge thanks to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. And if you would like to join their ranks to get some exclusive perks, feel free to check out the link in the description. But that's it from me. Stay awesome, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.